My date's eating all the fully loaded nachos. All the ones with the meat, cheese, and everything. The ones that are fully loaded, she's hogging them. So I'm mostly getting just chips. Like mostly just chips, like nothing on them. But like a little bit of cheese and maybe one little nugget of meat.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week, well, actually, I'm not Babish.
And I'm not Babish either.
A whole year has passed, and that must mean it's time for another edition of Tapley and CJ recreate web series that they're fans of. Well, why do we do this again?
To express our undying love for each other?
Works for me.
Hot ones, over under, amoeba what's in my bag, and now Babish.
And if we're doing Babish, we have to take a look at the fully loaded nachos in Tim Robinson's I Think You Should Leave.
Now, admittedly, the fully loaded nachos in the sketch in question are comically sparse. The meat in the sketch looks like some kind of ground beef, probably taco flavored. Given this is a chain restaurant in this scene, we'll use Taco Bell flavored seasoning. We'll cook our ground meat until it's browned, making sure to break apart and prepare ourselves with a little nugget of meat on each bite. We'll add about a quarter cup of water and our taco seasoning and bring this to a simmer and cook until the moisture absorbs into the meat, about 5 minutes.
Meanwhile, the rest of the nacho dressing seems to be halved cherry tomatoes, some cilantro, and some barely melted cheese. Now, the barely melted part is arguably the most upsetting aspect of these fully loaded nachos, so let's plate up our triangle tortilla chips.
Accidentally add way more meat than is canon.
Whoops. And put enough cheese on them so they legally qualify as nachos, and stick them in the microwave for roughly 15 seconds, or about as long as it would take for each piece of shredded cheese to retain its shredded form, but only barely melt onto the chip.
Let's add our delicious halved cherry tomatoes, cilantro, and voila! Fully loaded nachos.
Let's go in for a bite, and, well, Tapley got the fully loaded bite while I was stuck with a somewhat only half-loaded chip, maybe like the one little nugget of meat. But I think we can both agree these are, well, below average nachos and have a lot of room for improvement.
Safe to say they won't belong anywhere near the Clean Plate Club. It's worth going back to scratch to make nachos that perhaps more truly embody the fully loaded experience. We'll start by lining our baking sheet in foil and preheating the oven to 425 degrees. We'll stick with our ground beef, as the show requested, but instead of taco seasoning, let's season with a bit of garlic powder, salt, and pepper, and throwing it back to the first anniversary that started this all, some hot sauce. Might we recommend the last dab? And let it brown.
Halved cherry tomatoes and some scattered cilantro can undoubtedly be improved upon, so how about making our own pico de gallo? We'll start by dicing 1/2 medium-sized red onion, 2 jalapenos, be careful around the eyes, and a green bell pepper for good measure. Now let's add about 2 teaspoons of lime juice and salt to taste before covering this bowl and letting these flavors get to know each other in the fridge for about 15 minutes.
Next, we'll move on to the cherry tomatoes, which I'm just going to take over doing because CJ, quite frankly, was bad at it. We'll finally chop them into, well, more appetizing and less surreally large bites. We don't have to get into it, but there would be more fully loaded bites in the show if there had been more than 5 halved cherry tomatoes on the nachos. Anyway, after we're done, we'll move into dicing a 1/2 cup of cilantro finally. Once our mix in the fridge is properly marinated, we'll add the tomatoes and cilantro, and we'll use this tiny whisk to combine. We had to get a tiny whisk in here somewhere, didn't we? Kind of unnecessary, but, you know.
On our baking sheet, we'll spread out a full bag of triangle-shaped corn chips and get some essentials going, maybe some black beans and pinto beans, drain the can as to not sog down the chips like I did. And of course, let's add the ground beef into the mix, making sure to get into every nook and cranny as to avoid a Tim Robinson situation. Now for the cheese, which will be what is culinarily referred to as a metric fuck ton of Monterey Jack cheese. Like, for real, coat these guys. Go liberally with it. After that last round of nachos, we need it.
Pop those chips in the oven for about 15 minutes or until they're nice and melty. Then we'll bring our pico back out and add to the mix, and there you go, a better version of what the show presents us. Now we'll invite our friends who are just off screen to help us induct these nachos into the Clean Plate Club.